Hey everybody, it's the Salty Pug Lord. How y'all been doing? Well, today I want to talk a little bit about building hover vessels in Empyrion Galactic Survival. And I need to go over a couple little technicalities before we get into the big meat of this. The first thing that I want to make very clear is if you look in the upper left corner of the screen there, you see it says Empyrion Alpha 10.5. In Empyrion Alpha 10.6, there's apparently going to be a new flight model and some buffs to thrusters due to the changes in the CPU system, and some other things going on. So everything that I say here might become invalid when 10.6 becomes the real release and all the changes made in 10.6 become live. That said, I do think that at least some of what I'm about to tell you here will continue to be relevant, not just in 10.6, but in all future versions of Empyrion, or at least any future version that continues to use the container controller system that was introduced around Alpha 9. So, hover vessel design and building good hover vessels can be somewhat of a dark art in Empyrion. There have been a couple of really good videos on the subject, one by Spange, and one by another guy named David Cook, and I'll put links to those videos in the description of this video so you can go and watch them. They have to do basically with where to mount the hover engines on the hover vessel in order to give it reasonable agility, and particularly the ability to pitch the nose up and down in a useful way without just going off the rails and having a lot of weird problems. So when I set out to design a hover vehicle, I decided that I wanted to make what was essentially a spiritual successor to the Scarab HST. This is a hover vehicle by Jay Randall, and when I started Empyrion around Alpha 8, this was my favorite hover vessel. It got me up and running very quickly. It was a very competent hover vehicle, especially considering how small it was and the minimum amount of resources that you needed. Being the engineer and the kind of minimalist type of person that I am, when I set out to make a spiritual successor, I wanted to, as much as possible, maintain all the great things that I loved about the Scarab HST. And over here, you can see on the left, is my spiritual successor. I called it the Cerambyx, which is a genus of beetles. Scarab is a genus of beetles, and Cerambyx is another genus of beetles. And just for those of you who think bugs are cool, let's pop out to the desktop real quick. Cerambyx beetles are sometimes called longhorn beetles or Capricorn beetles because of the long antennas that they have. In my opinion, the shape of this beetle is somewhat reminiscent of the shape that I made on my spiritual successor HV. If you are really low on nightmare fuel, there's actually a YouTube video, and I'll put the URL in the description of this video, showing a guy letting one of these run all over his arm. But probably those of you who are bug phobic are cringing right now, so let's go back to looking at the build itself. So as I said, I wanted to maintain a lot of the things that I loved about the Scarab HST, and one of the things that I really loved about the Scarab HST was the Gatling guns were really effective because the Scarab HST has really good up and down nose pitch. And this is something that is relatively difficult to achieve on a stable hover vehicle that still drives stably and controls reasonably. The way I think that Jeff actually managed to pull it off with the Scarab is make the center of volume, or center of, as I think of it, the center of aerodynamic pressure, be directly in line with the center of mass. The yellow ball is the center of mass, and the blue ball, I've been told, is the center of volume, but I think of it as the center of pressure, which is a concept from aerospace engineering. It's sort of the place where all the aerodynamic forces act upon the vehicle in the same way that the center of mass is where all the sort of gravitational forces act upon the vehicle. So you can see what an incredible job Jeff did here with just getting that blue ball to be right on the same center line as the yellow ball. I mean, it is really, really well lined up, no matter which angle you look at this. And I think that was a huge reason why this vehicle was so stable and handled so sweetly, and why the Gatling guns on the front, which is those guys there, were so useful because you were able to pitch the thing up and down, and if there was a spider 2 feet in front of you, you could pitch right down and shoot that spider. And if there was a drone right above you, you were able to pitch the vehicle right up and shoot at that drone. That's something that I struggled to make work in my version because I had to learn a lot about how to put the hover engines, how to make sure that all the container extensions worked correctly, and just a lot of sort of new Empyrion version 10 issues. As you can see, I haven't done nearly as good a job as Jeff did. My center of pressure or center of volume is actually quite a ways off that blue line, and although it is well centered, it is in truth rather high, and what I found that meant in practice was that when you are going along at high speed, the aerodynamic effects cause the nose to push down. But for the moment, I just wanted to show you, yet more J. Randall fanboying, because it seems that everything Jeff does is just amazing, even the smallest and most trivial things. As I think I said somewhere in a YouTube chat, all the best designers I know steal all their best ideas from Jeff, because that's the place to get all the best ideas. So my design goals for making the spiritual successor, I think as I said a little bit about this earlier, was I wanted it to be a very affordable, very simple build. The simplicity of the original Scarab was something I greatly admired. And I wanted it to be something that didn't have a high resource cost, because that was something that was really great about the original. And I believe that I have actually managed to make those goals work. I'm pretty sure that this is an unlock level 5. Yeah, okay, unlock level 5, size class 0.2, and as you can see, this thing tops out at 160 copper. So the resource cost is actually very, very small, and should be really, really easy to get, even when you're level 5, just by finding some capital vessel wreck and salvaging a few hardened steel plates off. You should be able to afford this thing really, really soon, and be able to start getting around the world quite well. Now, one thing that I did want to be able to do was to make it a little bit upgradable. I didn't actually want to make this guy capable of carrying a shield and a pentaxid tank, because I found that the 3-ton combined weight of those things actually changed the handling of the build quite badly. But one thing that really is great to have on a hover vessel is a medical station. But the medical station is an unlock level 7 thing, so instead of actually putting a med station in here, I simply put a place where you can put a med station. That way you can get this hover vehicle at level 5, and then a little while later when you hit level 7, you'll be able to just throw the med station in there and have a med station. And since we're at the back of the vehicle, we might as well go over the equipment. It's probably, as you guessed, very much inspired by Jeff's original, but with some tweaks for Empyrion Alpha 10. So obviously you have your constructor, you've got your armor locker hiding back there, the medical station will be able to go right in there, you've got a fridge, you've got your oxygen station, hidden down there is a Wi-Fi, because that's a new thing, and this is your main container controller. You can see that there's 2250 volume here, which, I went for sort of a minimal type of loadout. This is a beginner HV, it's not supposed to carry everything. And unlike the original, I decided I was going to protect things a little bit by putting a rolling door over it. This is kind of a good idea that I stole from Spange, because, again, you steal good ideas from the best people. So I think next I want to cover an issue that I alluded to earlier about how, because of the alignment of the center of mass and the center of volume or center of pressure, the Gatling guns were very effective on the original HST. I actually had to do a lot of work on my Cerambyx in order to make that possible here. And I learned a lot, particularly from Spange's Dark Heart of Hoverminer video and the other video that I mentioned earlier. Let's go into God mode and we can take a look where I put the hover engines on this guy and how they relate to the center of mass. And after we see what, I'll tell you a little bit about the how and some lessons that I learned doing it. So you can see that the center of mass there is pretty darn close to directly below the middle hover engine. And that's actually something that I had to fight pretty hard to maintain, because when you put cargo into the container system, you dump stuff in here, the container system actually distributes that pretty darn evenly among all the container extensions. And so if you're not careful about how you put your container extensions into the vehicle, then you can wind up with a vehicle that becomes extremely nose-heavy or extremely tail-heavy when it gets loaded down with cargo. And obviously that's a problem, because not only is the vehicle going to handle badly, but then you might have trouble getting your Gatlings to either point up at drones or point down at bugs. So a big lesson I learned from this build was build the whole vehicle first, minus the container extensions and hover engines, and then go back and put in the container extensions and start loading up a bunch of stuff into your container controller, and make sure that your center of gravity doesn't change drastically because you didn't really distribute the container extensions well. And just for a little bit of fun here, let me show you something that I made a blueprint of earlier. I sort of made a blueprint of the semi-completed Cerambyx that did not have the container extensions in it, so let's spawn that. So here is an early version of the Cerambyx that does not have any container extensions in it, and let's go underneath and take a look. So you can see that all the space under here where the container extensions go in the final product are not in this vehicle. And they're not in there because I wasn't quite sure yet where they would need to go, how they would affect the center of gravity, and how to distribute them evenly across the vehicle. Another thing to notice about this is that in the finished Cerambyx, or at least in the release candidate 1 here, the hover engines are in what's called a longitudinal arrangement, meaning that they go along the long axis of the vehicle, whereas in this prototype, they're what's called transverse, meaning they go across the long axis of the vehicle instead of with the long axis. I found this configuration to be a bit problematic because the hover engines are actually quite good at pushing down hard against the ground, and whenever I came down from a jump with this arrangement of hover engines, the vehicle would have a tendency to really roll over hard, the left or right, if I didn't exactly precisely stick the landing. And the reason, of course, is because the left and the right hover engines would push down on the ground so hard, push against the ground with such force that it was easy to create a rolling moment in the vehicle. In the completed one, I avoided that problem by putting them all along the center line, and they only really provide a sort of restoring force front and back, and don't provide any sort of rolling restoring force because they're all along the center line and they don't really push on the right or the left side of the vehicle. Another really surprising lesson that I learned while I was testing Cerambyx is that the container controller system and the center of gravity and such behave incredibly differently in a creative world and a survival world. And what I found in Empyrion 10.5 was that even if I went into the console and typed CM to change the mode of my creative world to be survival, that still didn't fix the problems with the container system and the center of gravity not behaving the same way in survival that they did in a creative world. That's another big thing that I learned, and a big tip that I want to deliver. Once you have a blueprint that you think works, I really want you to go and test it in a survival world, and don't think that you can get away with just going into the console doing CM to change the mode of your world. My finding, at least in 10.5, was that you are actually not going to get the same container controller behavior, the same center of mass behavior, the same cargo loading effects in a creative world that has been changed to survival as you will in a world that was originally survival. I know this sounds insane, and by all means, please verify this for yourself. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, but this is a huge thing that I discovered while I was working on the Cerambyx. A survival mode world is a very different place from a creative mode world that's been changed to survival with a console command. Speaking of console commands, I also want to talk a little bit about something that helped me out when I was building. It's nice to have a very consistent lighting when you're building, particularly when you're trying to get blocks to join and you're working on the shape of various things. In a creative mode world, you've got this debug menu right here. You can go in, you can stop the time by setting the time speed to 0, and then changing the global time to whatever you want. 10,000 works for me. It usually puts the sun just about as high as the sun will ever go. But in any event, there is a console command that even in a survival world, you can access this debug menu. You just go into this and do DM. So even if you're in a survival world, they will allow you to access this debug menu to stop time and to put the sun where you want it, so that you have an easier time working on your vehicles and the sun will never set, and you won't have to try and either work in the dark or throw down a tent to pass the night. It's just a nice little tip that makes working on things a little bit easier when you're in a survival mode, which you may have to be in order to accurately get the container system to properly load down your vehicle and show the effects of the new container system. So yeah, that's the Cerambyx. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it works for you as well as it's worked for me. I've been running through a survival game in 10.5, just trying to eat my own dog food and use the Cerambyx to be my first hover vessel. It's been quite good for me and quite successful. I've used it to hunt down all the resources I need to spawn myself an alpaca improved, which is another one of my blueprints, which is a starter CV that I designed to be a very good starter CV. If you guys have any thoughts on the Cerambyx, let me know. I'm really curious to know what other people think. I want to know if you think it's a worthy successor to J. Randall's excellent Scarab HST. Does it work for you? Does it allow you to get around the planet much better than that cruddy motorcycle? And is there anything that you would suggest that it be changed about it, or that could make it better? You know, let me know, drop a comment, or either here on YouTube or on Steam. I guess that's about all I have to tell you. So, to do a quick summary of what I said, when you're building hover vehicles, watch out for hover engine effects causing them to roll. You can try and put your hover engines longitudinally along the main line of the vehicle, which should reduce that effect. Make sure that you build a shell version of your HV first, and then after you've built the shell version, put in the container extensions and make sure that when you load up the container controller, it doesn't change the center of mass drastically. I mean, the center of mass should move up and down vertically when you add more weight to the vehicle. But if you load up the container controller and the center of mass jumps a lot, either left, right, or forward, backward, then you're going to have a bad time. So distribute your container extensions in such a way that that doesn't happen. Yeah, I guess that's about it. I hope that you are staying salty, my friends.